Omar, let's talk about your early playing.
Okay.
Why did you first want to play the drums?
A relative gave me one of those toy snare drums as a holiday gift. And I just had an affinity for holding the sticks. And in fact, my mother says they put the drum around my neck, and I started as a kid, maybe 4 years old, playing like a little march beat on the drum. And I guess it was just natural for me to play it.
On drum set, how'd you
Mhm.
get started? What do you used to play in practice?
Well, I fooled around with the snare drum for a few years, and I say age 8, my dad bought me a kick drum and a hi-hat and a ride cymbal. And a dear family friend who was a conga player started to teach me some basic rhythms. And I probably would have to attribute a lot of my approach to playing drums to learning basic rhythms from a conga player, because they break down and they put rhythms together like a puzzle.
Right.
So when he taught me rhythms, he would say, well, here's the bass drum part, here's the snare drum part, here's the ride cymbal part, here's the hi-hat part, and he would make me play each one separate, and then he'd make me put it all together. And that allowed me to get into the sound of each component of the drum set as an instrument itself, the cymbal and the different sounds I can get out of a cymbal, the snare drum and the different sounds I can get out of that, hi-hat.
Right.
You know what I mean?
How about studying? I mean, did you take lessons and learn the rudiments?
I got started off in a rudimental kind of way with a guy named Walter Perkins in Queens, great jazz drummer. He invited me over to his house. I think his daughter was in my 3rd grade class or something. My dad plays the drums, So I went by his house, and he offered to give me some lessons for free. So I would go there every day after school. And he showed me, double stroke roll, single stroke roll, triplets, and kind of got me started with some of the basic ones.
Traditional?
Yeah,
grip?
yeah. Traditional grip, exactly. I played traditional grip until I was about 15 years old. And what I discovered about traditional grip was that it was fine when I was just playing a snare drum, because I could tilt the snare drum on the stand on an angle, and it really made the left hand position make sense.
Right.
But when you're playing a drum set, you have the snare drum like this, and then you have this plane of toms and cymbals, and I discovered that I was putting strain on my shoulders, my back was weird, I was trying to switch up all the time. I got these weird calluses on my hands. After a while I said, well, wait a minute, there's a better way to do this. And I discovered the better way when I started playing timpani.
Mm.
And then when I was going to Music and Art High School in New York, if you're switching back and forth from timpani to snare drum parts, I was like, well, instead of, building up chops, using different chops all the time, I said, why don't I just use the matched grip? And so I had to kind of change my thinking and develop the muscle for matched grip in my left hand. But then once I did that, it actually cleared up the problem I was having with my shoulder, the callus that I had. A lot of drummers get a callus right here, the traditional grip
Right.
guys. That went away, and then I was able to get a more balanced setup and a more balanced posture for playing drums. And I think it was at that point that the whole physical aspect of my playing opened up for me.
Let's talk about that. Your limbs are seem like they're completely loose and free. You're not worrying about your balance at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that?
Sure. My dad, his name is Hassan, he's a trombone player. And he basically laid a trombone player concept on me about the position of my arms. He said to me, when you're playing, he said, why don't you move your arms away from your body? Because trombone players, when they hold the horn, they're holding the horn up like this, and both of their arms and the elbows are out like this. And he said, when you do that, your breathing is open. It's deeper. Whereas when your arms are close to your body, it's like a little restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
So he sometimes he would even let me hold his horn and say, just blow a note in the horn. Take a breath. He'd tell me some crazy stuff. Look up, take a deep breath, and when you look up, the air goes right down, like diaphragm.
Mm-hmm.
He got me into breathing. He used to make me lay on the floor, and he'd put a phone book on my belly. And he said, well, if you're breathing right, you're going to move that phone book. And I thought that was a hip way to really get a sense of how I should be breathing,
Mm-hmm.
So that whole idea of arms away from the body, straight back, that's strictly for comfort, and it actually makes everything flow out of your body more. If you're slouched over and your arms are closed, you can't get your ideas from your heart, your mind, to the limbs fast because you're trying to work through all this bad posture and breathing.
When you're on the drum set, you look real comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Just the way everything is set up and everything that's in your reach.
Okay.
Can you talk about your setup?
Well, why don't we move over to the drum set, and I can actually show you
Okay.
some of my thoughts and the reasons why I position the drums the way I do.
Okay.
Okay. Years ago, a teacher that I had named Clyde Lucas suggested that once I get the snare drum in a comfortable spot, that I could situate that tom-tom, and at the time I was only using maybe 2 tom-toms and a floor tom, to put that first tom basically in a line with the snare drum. And that way I could just get like a straight and smooth motion from the snare drum to the first tom-tom. And since I use 3 rack toms, what I do is I situate it where I get an even flow out. So it's like from the snare drum up and then even, like this kind of motion. And I think that it's good for posture and balance on the set. I also think that seat height is very important. You should experiment with this, but I think it's important that you should sit in a way where if you have to play heel and toe on the pedals, or you have to play alto to get volume and power, that you should try to find a seat height that would allow you to position your legs in this way, and also get you some freedom with your limbs and everything, so that you don't have to think about it. You can just switch heel to toe or alto based on the dynamics. And so that's my basic idea for my setup. I'm always looking for the balance in the setup, and the cymbals as well.
Let's talk about some of the gigs that you've done.
Okay.
You know, let's start out with in the studio, David Bowie. Big record,
Fun session too.
big record.
Yeah, fun session.
What did that experience mean to you? What did you gain from that?
What I gained from doing that record and other like rock type projects was that I think it introduced me to another bunch of people who didn't know that I played rock and played, you know, that kind of thing, the rock or funk rock kind of thing. And again, you know, it was perfect because as a kid, you know, I grew up playing along with records and emulating a lot of different grooves and learning a lot of different grooves, and consequently, I felt very comfortable in a lot of different situations. And I've managed to go in and kind of do for the music what it's needed in each instance. And what I've also discovered about going from style to style is that I've had to been very sensitive to the sounds of the drum set, the tuning of the drum set. You know, different music requires different tuning.
Right.
You know, different like approach to sound, touch, feel, and all of that. And the drums being very physical, you know, it's a very hard instrument to actually change styles on, you know, and make each thing work.
Right.
So that's like been a constant exercise for me, you know, to like when I sit down to play rock. You know, if I sit down to play R&B, you know, to play R&B.
And get that sound.
And get that sound and get that thing, and it's a lot of it revolves around a balance of all that.
When you walked into a studio and you met Bowie for the first time, or the Schofield record, or Sanborn, you know, guys that you listened to, let's say maybe when you were even younger, that you had a
Yeah.
chance to play with. What was your confidence, and how did you prepare yourself mentally
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
to say, I'm going to go in now and I'm going to work with whoever?
Right. You know, it's, as you were asking that, I thought about the fact that, you know, if you've been a fan of like a musician or of an artist, and then you all of a sudden get a chance to play with them, you know, what you have to remember going into those situations is that, for one thing, the reason they called you is because they heard about you and they liked something about what you did, something that you're going to bring to it. And the other thing is that, you know, it's about playing with other people and relating to people. And what I realized that I needed to do, even before I sat down and played drums, was to really just like go in and make myself comfortable around everybody or talk to everybody and don't feel uptight about being around these people and just be myself. You know, and I think that if you can, and you know, there's no formula for this. I mean, that's something you just have to get in that situation and feel it out.
Right.
But I think this is really important, because before you would get comfortable with the music, you know, get in there and get comfortable with the people first. You know, and then all of a sudden, the music happens, because it's about relating to people and playing as a team. And you know, it's hard to do that if you get into a situation and you know, it's weird and people aren't communicating. And so I immediately go in, whether it be just joking around or, you know, having fun or, you know, just being myself, and then say, hey, well, let's play some music now. And that has always worked.
So you kind of break the ice with it.
Got to break the ice. And again, I don't know if there's a formula, because each situation is different, you know. And you know, some of the artists are very, you know, they have their quirky personality or whatever, and so do we, you know. And
How about Weather Report?
Oh, that was pretty deep. That was like a lesson in this, because, you know, needless to say, I was really excited about getting that gig. I had been a fan since high school, and I knew all the music, so you know, I was all prepared to fly to LA. You know, the rehearsals were at Joe Zawinul's house, and there was this music on the stands, and you know, I'm all ready. And you know, Joe will say, well, let's play, you know, look at that third page, there's a groove there, let's look at that, and let's play that. And so, you know, he would isolate a groove and play this groove, and we would play that groove for like 5-10 minutes, and then we'd stop, we wouldn't play the rest of the chart, and then, you know, it would be like a break. You know, and I'm going, well, we didn't play the chart, and there's like 6 pages here, and it's like, the gig is like, you know, next week, the first gig, you know, I'm freaking out, and I'm saying, well, are we going to play the rest of this? Come on, let's go, let's have some coffee, let's go talk. And then what I realized after a week of rehearsal, or a week of not rehearsing, was that talking that we used to do at the table in his yard under the umbrella with Wayne and Joe and Victor and everybody was actually making us closer. So that when we did sit down to play some music, that all of a sudden we could complete that conversation that we were having outside behind the instruments. And that's the human part of playing music. It kind of transcends like, well, was it good or was it bad or did they play great? It's kind of hard to judge that because, you're real honest. You're just making music.
Yeah, I think that's music on another level.
It
when
is,
that
and you can't
spirit
really
comes through.
You can't touch it,
Yeah. How about playing with Sting?
Mm-hmm.
What thoughts do you have on that?
That was a lot of fun because I got a chance to work with some guys that I had met but never worked with. Branford, I had seen Branford around town in clubs and whatnot. Kenny Kirkland, I'd known him for years, but we hadn't really played together. Darryl Jones, I had seen him playing with Miles. So when it came together, it was like, oh, we finally get to make some music together. And I met Sting doing a Dire Straits record called Brothers in Arms in Montserrat. He was there, I guess, vacationing or something, so we got a chance to meet. And he said, well, you know, auditioning drummers, blah, 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 come by. So went by, and it just, you know, that when those people were in the room, it just kind of happened.
Mm.
I guess he probably had a lot of configuration of people. And then when that bunch of guys were in the room together, it happened. And the tour was a great experience because when you have a bunch of guys who come from an improvisational background, playing jazz, even though, you know, Darryl has played rock and Kenny Kirkland kind of, you know, does anything, and, you know, Branford's musical sensitivity is so awesome that, you know, we could kind of do whatever we wanted to do. You know, every night had something happen musically on stage. It was, I don't recall a gig that was like boring on that tour. You know, it was a lot of fun.
Sting gave everybody a chance to stretch.
Yeah, it was fun, man. It was a lot of fun, you know. And playing that music for those large audiences too, in those large venues, you know. That was a great experience, you know. And we used to get there at like, you know, 3, 4 in the afternoon for a sound check. And before the sound check, I had this little ritual that I used to do. I used to like walk the perimeter of the halls because I wanted to get a sense as to where my energy needed to project in a particular place. You know, it's like it's a spiritual thing in a way because, you know, in a big, you know, when you play a club, you know, there's that, you know, it's very close, it's very tight. You could see the people at the back of the room, but in a
Right.
big hall, you know, when you look out, you mostly see a red exit sign way up in the back, you know. So I said, well, let me walk to that exit sign and look at the drum set and see what that looks like. And somehow in my mind, it was like I knew how far to throw my vibe. You know what I mean?
And see what they were experiencing looking down
Yeah,
at you.
because I felt like if I'm doing it right, if I'm doing the gig right, the person in the last row would be dancing as hard as the person in the first row. Early on in my playing, I worked on, like most drummers, you know, when you first start, you learn your rudiments and, you know, the alphabet, you know, the ABCs of drumming. And, you know, I always say to other drummers that, you know, when you learn the alphabet of the language, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know, as a kid, you memorize them, you get it in there, it becomes a part of you, and then as you build your vocabulary and you speak to people, you're not thinking A, B, C, you're not thinking the alphabet anymore. You forget that and you just express your thoughts in
Right.
conversation. To me, technique and the rudiments should be treated the same way. Learn them, spend time on them, get them down pat, you know, practice them at different speeds and different dynamics. And then when it's time to express yourself in the solo context, get that stuff, you know? And use those things to help you move around the instrument. That's all they're for, as far as I'm concerned. They're to help you move around. You know, you want to connect this and this with this. In terms of soloing, I always try to base my solos on what's happening with the composition. That's very important to me. And so therefore, it doesn't allow me the whole planning thing. And so I've moved away from actually planning a solo. Well, I'm going to play this and I'm going to play that. You know, a lot of times I've seen guys, you know, they learn these things in their rudiments, and you know, you kind of practice your licks at the house, and then you get out at a gig, and then instead of improvising, you start to kind of fall back on the things that you practice. But I think that we can take some of the pressure off of ourselves by looking at it from the compositional standpoint. You know, instead of, you know, saying, oh, well, I practice all this stuff and I've got these chops and I've got to use them, you know, why not let the music inspire you to that level of passion, that level of excitement, where all of a sudden, you know, the music feels so good to you that, you know, you just have to use that fast roll where you're playing a zillion miles an hour around the toms, because all of a sudden, you know, the music, the composition has called for it. It's giving you a reason for it.
So your solos then are completely spontaneous, or you have certain sections in your mind worked out?
Usually on a tour where you're playing the same songs every night, this is what has happened. You know, first week or so of the tour, the first 2 weeks, you're still kind of finding things. As it goes on, you know, you find a couple of signposts that you can use. But still, even if I do get a couple of those, I will still try to live on the edge and look for some adventure every night, so that people really get a sense of the spontaneity, of the fact that, you know, this is happening before me, right before my eyes. I feel that this person is taking me on a ride here. You know, you can tell when somebody is playing something that's kind of, you know, they're just kind of going through the motions, or they're actually playing thoughts and feelings and responding to the audience, responding to the other musicians on stage. And then at that point, you're making music to me. 1, 2, 3. All right, the in vamp. Let's take a look at that.
Okay.
Again, I'll set that up to normal tempo. Jump on in there with me, loop the groove, and then we'll slow it down. Okay.
Well, it's about that time. Maybe we can
Alright.
get the band to play another tune to go out on.
All right.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, sure has.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.